Hello, and welcome to the Sustainability Experts podcast, where we provide practical insights on sustainable business. I'm your host, Vanessa Thompson, and in this episode, we're diving into the topic of innovation with our esteemed guest, Dr. Libba Pinchot. Dr. Pinchot is the co-founder of the Presidio Graduate School and the author of Intrapreneuring, coining the term intrapreneurship, and she has been a pioneering force in the field of innovation. Dr. Pinchot is a nationally recognized expert in helping leaders achieve the triple bottom line success of profit, people, and planet. She has worked with companies such as Apple, IBM, Intel, HP, Texas Instruments, DuPont, Exxon, GE, P&G, J&J, Ford, and Stanford University. Libba, thank you so much for joining us today. I want to start off with a little bit of context to provide our audience on intrapreneurship. Intrapreneurship can lead to higher employee satisfaction, retention, creativity, and engagement. And I want to start off with three statistics to give context on our topic. The first is that less than 5% of companies' employees are intrapreneurs. But according to McKinsey, it was found that companies that embrace intrapreneurship are 50% more likely to outperform their peers in the industry. And according to Deloitte, 93% of professionals believe that intrapreneurial skills are crucial for a successful career. So before kind of getting into that, I wanted to start off with talking about your story. How did you get into this, and how did you lead yourself to coining the term intrapreneurship?
Well, when I went to college, and I was really lucky to go to college at all because my parents didn't, but I wasn't considered employable because I had a philosophy degree. That didn't help anything. And I went and begged my department head and said, "You got to help me find a job." And he had miraculously just gotten a multi-year grant to develop
Wow.
computer-assisted education. Now get it, it's 1965 in computers. Nobody has almost seen a
Wow.
computer. They take a whole room,
Yeah.
computer, right? And I didn't know anything about computers or kids or education. But I said, I have to have a job. I take it. So I was the second employee and got to hire all my friends, which was great. And we did that for 3 years. And I did learn a little bit about computers and kids and also how to stand up to the bureaucracy when they said
Yeah.
we had to do something that wasn't great for kids. But
Yeah.
the grant ran out and I didn't have a job again. And on registration day, I walked into a fellowship for a Head Start teacher training program degree when Head Start didn't exist. So again, this is something that like didn't exist that I like walked into and
Wow.
learned how to uh, teach Head Start teachers. And we had this was really a good old days of the war on poverty. 100 single parents who had full daycare, full tuition, and full living expenses at a community college, and we for 2 years, and it was a great program. And then the Vietnam War fired up, and the money all got taken away,
Wow.
and so I ran away and married my husband, and we retreated to the farm, a biodynamic farm that his brother had, and that was my business school and my
Hmm.
sustainability immersion.
Hmm.
So it was it prepared me for the sustainability side and
Hmm.
somehow integrating it with business. But I had never been in a corporation in my life at that point.
Wow.
And so I had a little, so how did that happen? Well, I'll just tell you real quickly. We found a job in corporations, each of us, and we looked around and we said, "Oh my God, it's a command and control environment."
Hmm.
The creativity isn't there. And I've been doing all this new stuff and was very future focused, and it was all about society and reinventing myself and so forth.
Hmm.
And and it it was so different in corporations, and we were just horrified. So we wrote a paper, and then we went to a conference and wrote a paper, and stayed up at night and typed this little paper about how you should be able to let people like entrepreneurs in corporations in order to do the innovation, because they were so bad at innovation because they put it in a committee and it wasn't like down in the
Yeah.
front lines of the organization where people knew what needed to be done. And
Mm.
that paper the next morning got picked up by Norman McRae, who was the editor of the London Economist, and he wrote about it in an editorial about this idea of
Wow.
entrepreneuring. And then the phone started ringing. So that's how we got
Wow.
it. And we were still living on the farm.
Oh my gosh. Well, you ended up working, was it at over 800 different companies that you
Well,
consulted
no,
with?
no,
And
probably not
okay.
800, but what that 800 number is as as we did this over decades, we would have trainings with many teams, and those teams
Okay.
would actually be mentored, and then we would help find sponsors so they could get the resources, and they would end up having actual new lines of business, sometimes
Mhm.
internal services and sometimes products on the outside, worth millions of dollars to the company. And we once counted up, there were something like 800 of them that had been spawned by these trainings.
Wow.
Um, but you know what? You would get a new CEO, and even though it was making money for the company, it wasn't considered strategic. So some people would have their careers kind of parked. There was a lot of, it wasn't ideal, but we wrote a book about that too.
Another book in addition to that.
Another book, we'll
Yeah.
talk about another time.
Wow. Well, out of the companies that you did see kind of a lot of success from a lot of those trainings with helping innovation come into the culture and building those entrepreneurs, um, how did you do that? Also as an outsider, coming in, how did you educate people on how to create that culture of innovation? Because particularly in a lot of big companies, that's really difficult because sometimes that innovation can conflict with their existing business lines, and you really have to build in this mindset of risk taking as well.
Well, we would do it with volunteers. We
Hmm.
would we would have an idea fair, and we would present this all to the company, and they would agree to do it, that we could do this, and we would have, in a big ballroom, we would have maybe 100 people volunteer, because Peter Drucker said, knowledge work is all volunteer work. Can't force anyone to do knowledge work, right? And also, people can self-identify. They know if they've got something burning in them. So we'd advertise it, and we'd get 100 people to come,
Mm.
and 3 days, and we would, tell them about entrepreneuring and business and so forth. And then we'd have an idea fair, and they would get pieces of paper, and they would put their idea on there, and we'd give them little cards in a little pocket, and they would fill the whole ballroom with their 100 ideas, right? And then
Hmm.
they would walk around and with their little cards giving comments on everybody's ideas, which is really good for networking and common support and building a
Yeah.
community, right? And then we would require them to form teams, and they had to have a team that was somewhat balanced, and we would end up with maybe 30 teams, and then we would train those teams for 6, 8 weeks. We've actually done this fairly recently online in a pharmaceutical company, and it was just as effective, which astounded us.
Interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But the part of the secret is, one, they really got trained in how to make a startup business, and they all had sponsors, and we would train the sponsors as well to how to help them, because um, they had to be able to cobble resources together. Uh, and so somebody higher up had to say, well, I'll take a little out of that budget and a little out of that budget, to do the thing. And some of these innovations were quite profitable. Many of them were. I would say most of them were that survived. And, or they all were that survived. And also, because they came from the values and the intrinsic motivation of the people who were doing them, which was the story we gave them. Look, you're not going to be able to survive in this internal entrepreneurial world if you're not passionate about it. If it doesn't,
Hmm.
if you don't want to come home and like think about it all the time, it's got to be something that's really uh, important to you. Well, that's something that's value based. That's something that's going, that comes and is going to make the world a little better. It's not just enough, to make the bottom line a little better. It's got to be something that's going to make the company better and their colleagues better, or the society or the communities better. And so what came out of those pipelines were either sustainability or something for the consumers that was a little bit of a social innovation. What came out was making things a little better kinds of innovations. And of course, then we got to slide gradually into more and more of the sustainability and social responsibility stuff.
Wow, that's really interesting. It's also interesting that you stayed with them for 6 to 8 weeks, because that makes a lot of sense. Because to change a culture and be able to really influence people, you really do have to stay that long to invest in people so that they can develop something that really is a breakthrough.
Yeah, and actually, when we would stay with a company 1 or 2 years,
Okay.
because then once they were in business, they had gates that they had to, where they had to perform, and there was needed lots of help along the way. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And what were some of the results from your work? I know you worked with IKEA and so many other incredible brands as well.
I actually haven't worked with IKEA. I have to correct that. I am a
Okay.
student of IKEA. I'm a passionate student of IKEA, but I haven't been inside IKEA. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
And
what
but
were
I have
some
a
of
lot of stories about IKEA to tell you.
Okay. Well, what were some of the outcomes from this work, from you consulting with a lot of these big brands?
Well, I think I'll tell a story about a large government agency that we consulted with,
Okay.
because companies are bureaucratic, government agencies are bureaucratic, and the purpose and part of entrepreneuring is to sort of dissolve the bureaucracy by
Mhm.
giving a more entrepreneurial freedoms. Well, we set up programs in a couple of other companies, Intel and AT&T, and also the Forest Service, where we created a little standalone businesses uh, that were allowed to buy and sell services within the company. Now, if you think about a corporation or a government agency, a good part of the work, maybe half of the work, is staff services like marketing
Hmm.
and research and so on and so forth. There are all those departments, right? And they're not necessarily very innovative or efficient. And if somebody in the company, uh, as they used to say at AT&T, if somebody in the company had a PR release and they would go to the PR department, this was many, many years ago, the PR department would say, take a number, we'll get back to you eventually. But they weren't motivated, right? Well, we
Mm.
set up alternative PR departments, alternative marketing departments, and
Mm.
that were actually scrappy little entrepreneurships. Want me to repeat that? We set up
Yeah.
alternative marketing departments and alternative PR departments that were scrappy little entrepreneurships that actually had to win the approval of the internal customers, and they'd just get, they wouldn't get extra money, they'd just get transfer payments, but they they would be so much more customer focused and scrappy that they would just grow. And we had 38 of these in the Forest Service that lasted for 15 years, some of
Wow.
that would, even kind of began to branch out and begin to do uh, the 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 long range planning for other government entities and so forth. They became big businesses. I mean, like they had 40, 50
Yeah.
people in them, and they were told they could keep the money that they made in their bank account. They couldn't take it home, of course, and so they actually, how in a business, a corporation, if you accumulate savings at the end of the year, it disappears, so everybody has to spend it, right?
Hmm.
Okay. This was different. They got to keep that and then buy themselves something new and expand their company, their internal
Hmm.
company.
Interesting.
It's not easy to follow,
Yeah.
but it was real. And it's one of my very favorite things.
Yeah,
And when I
absolutely.
was talking about dissolving the bureaucracy, that's a dissolution of bureaucracy.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. We have to invest in order to see that innovation, in order to see that growth, in order to see that scale. Um, I'm
Yeah.
curious too, kind of, all of these things are so integral to a business, motivating employees, helping them really serve their own values so that the culture really shines and you see that innovation really take place. Um, but, it's intangible. It's really difficult to see kind of the results of that. One, kind of not only how do you implement that and really engage and motivate and empower those employees, but also how do you measure that as well too? Because it's something that's so important to a business. It's a huge part of the success of a business, but it's really hard to measure or see the results of it.
Yeah, it's not that hard. And the reason it's not that hard is that, the wonderful thing about business is that we keep books and there's a measurement, right?
Yeah.
And so each of these enterprises, entrepreneurial enterprises that sprang up, because these aren't just all ideas. These are have to be.
Mhm.
There's a difference between invention and innovation. Invention is a good idea. Innovation is that idea has to be applied until it begins to make a difference at the level of the customer and begin to take income in, right?
Mhm.
And these enterprises were innovations, and they kept books, and you could see how the enterprise was falling to the bottom line. Now, you could also see that the enterprise probably was a little different than the things they were doing and might have been more exciting to customers, right?
Mm.
So,
Yeah. Interesting. And kind of to add to that too, how do you, build in that culture of risk taking too? And I would imagine this kind of connects to values and culture as well, helping people feel safe enough in a workplace to be able to take those necessary risks for an innovation.
yeah,
How do you build, a culture like that, a structure for that,
yeah.
where risk taking is allowed and it's seen as a good thing in the organization?
Well, yeah, and we did have that problem when I said that um, uh, we had all these entrepreneurial teams, but sometimes there would be some big strategic change. And it often was like the CEO, something happened, and they didn't think what the other guy had done was worthwhile, and so they just kind of get rid of it or something. I don't know, but people would be a little bit hung out to dry, because their innovation, their team was no longer valued, and then they would have to go back and find an internal job in the company, right? And
Yeah.
they had a perfectly good job that was actually producing well for the company. So that's when we began to get excited about making the enterprises actually have standing in the company. And
Hmm.
and we worked with the unions actually, like in the Forest Service. The union kind of thought, oh, what is this? Is this just the next big downsizing wave, or outsourcing wave? And then they begin to get the hang of it. It's not outsourcing, it's insourcing, and
Hmm.
and it's an expansion for the employees, And so they got totally on board. And
Hmm.
but the standing, you have to give one sponsor, you have to have a sponsor. And second is these people couldn't, these businesses could not, we had little contracts, they could not be shut down unless they were like, breaking the law or harming something or so forth. They
Mhm.
actual had standing as long as they were making their nut, okay?
Mm.
And the winds of the strategic changes couldn't impact them. And that was sort of a later uh, a design feature that was critical to uh, that kind of safety. But in
Yeah.
actual fact, of the 800 just standard entrepreneurial ventures we had, in general, everyone around them knew that they were useful and profitable. So they got protected.
Yeah. I have seen a lot of organizations really building out their own internal startups to carry out some of their R&D and things like that. And it has been, proven to be successful. Are those the kind of structures that you would be thinking of and encouraging, companies to be thinking of to really create a structure for innovation?
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a good idea. And uh, it's also it's critical to give real training so people are business people, right?
Hmm.
And of course, that's where, we were talking earlier, well, how did you start a business school? And we'd never been to business school. And uh, and it's because we trained people in business, for
Hmm.
25, 30 years, but it was action learning business. It was action
Yeah.
learning training.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of business school, you co-founded a business school and an incredibly prestigious one that also was the first to offer an MBA that had a sustainability concentration back in 2002 to be really the first in the industry to do that. I'd love to hear a little bit more of the story about how that came about and also the vision that all of you had to create a school that would be thinking about the long term for business and the planet.
Well, uh, first, I'm going to make a claim. Uh, I'm an educator, and I had this vision, and it just drove me crazy that I wanted to see, because I had seen all the entrepreneurs, right? I
Hmm.
wanted to see every young person trained in entrepreneurship,
Mm.
literally, because at that, if you actually have those basic skills of starting a business, not everyone's going to do it. It's way too hard. It requires
Hmm.
resources not everyone has or so, but you have an internal safety net
Mm.
because you always have a possibility of landing on your feet and doing a little business of some kind. And
Yeah.
I presented it at conferences. I actually won it in high school to start with.
Oh, wow.
And with mentors from and that you couldn't graduate from high school unless you'd had your basically social entrepreneurship
Hmm.
uh,
And business training.
career.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And where you actually had action learning and went out and did something with some community members supporting you and so forth.
Mm.
And nothing really came of it. And I ran into a friend who I was working with on entrepreneuring projects, and he said, "Oh, well, I've run a graduate school." He said, and he had a good one. And
Wow.
he said, "Why don't you make it a graduate program?" And I said, "Well,
Hmm.
that's daunting." But within a year, we had started one. So
Wow.
so it wasn't high school, ideas morph, but it was, we did it because we were standalone. We had no tradition we were a startup. We had no tradition
Right.
to to abide by. And so, like Dr. Vanessa Thompson does all of her teaching, we could make it action learning, the same kind of action learning we've gotten good at teaching entrepreneurship, right?
Mm,
So it was very hands-on learning. It was highly
mm,
collaborative. It was very team-based, and there was a core course that went through the 2 years that everyone took every term uh, that was called Leadership and Personal Development. And it was sort of the best of the kind of developmental psychology or business psychology of how to engage others, how to build healthy teams, how
mm.
to understand who you are and how you best should use yourself and so forth.
Yeah.
But I do want to say one thing. My favorite word is engagement,
Mm,
because in the if you're doing a movement, of which entrepreneuring was,
yeah.
and now sustainable entrepreneuring is, the, your biggest task has to be to engage in a company everyone into the uh, game of
Hmm.
having sustainable entrepreneurial
Hmm.
development in the company. It's like, and so learning how you influence and engage people
Mm.
is so critical. Anyway, engagement's my favorite word, and I agree with it. I think you mentioned this statistic that the vast majority of employees are disengaged, right?
Right.
Yeah, that keeps coming
Yeah.
every time, and uh, and so. Can I tell you a story about this person at Microsoft?
Go ahead.
Okay, good. I got to get his name right. Uh, Drew Wilkinson.
Okay.
Went to work. He was a punk rock musician who had done a lot of sustainability sort of
Okay.
with NGOs, and that was his passion on the side. And he got hired in 2018 in their Department of Community Building, and he
Okay.
found someone who was just as excited about sustainability as he was, who was
Mm.
Holly Beale. And they co-founded Microsoft's, I think it's sustainability community,
Mm.
and it has 10,000 members now.
Wow. Okay.
Okay, and over 30 chapters. And the motto of the community is make sustainability part of everyone's job.
Hmm.
And, they have hackathons in which hundreds of programmers deal with, things like waste in the sea, plastic waste,
Yeah.
thing. But what Drew spent his time doing was figuring out how to give every employee the opportunity to do sustainability in a meaningful way,
Hmm.
regardless of their job title or their experience. And he said, and just he talks about the democratization of sustainability.
Hmm.
Everybody has something meaningful to contribute. And this is
Yeah.
going on. This is changing Microsoft. And as a person who has known hundreds of Microsoft employees, the culture is changing.
That's wonderful to hear.
It becomes meaningful. So people go to work with an opportunity to. So I mean, sustainability then is like a silver lining of
Hmm.
engagement in that it gives meaning
Yeah.
to to the work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is, something that I hope is changing within a lot of corporations. I often see people misunderstanding what sustainability is, thinking that there's a job that is an environmentalist or that there's a company that is a sustainable company. And it's just this subsector of the economy. When the
Mhm.
reality is that thinking in a way that's long term should be a part of every business model to be successful. You can't be thinking on a quarterly basis, year over year, and see innovation or sustainability pan out. You have to be thinking year over year and thinking about that long-term mindset where you're investing in innovation, you're investing in people, and you're investing in the resources or the environmental resources that you're going to be pulling into your business. And there's so many organizations that I see being so much more successful when they understand that, when they understand that sustainability is a part of every job function. It's a part of the finance team, it's part of the HR team, it's part of every organization and part of every team. Thinking in that way is actually really helpful to be innovative and be successful as a business. So I hope people are starting to understand that it's not just one sector
That's
that this
right.
applies to, you know?
Yeah, and it also has to be fun. And
Yeah.
and I think that's what Drew Wilkinson and his partner did was, I mean, those hackathons are wild. And they've had them for a long time, but then they started focusing them on ways that the groups could uh, support real issues,
Mm.
like the ocean and so forth. And 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 they had a really good time. And if you look on, you can look on the videos about this. It's sort of a loose organization, but organization within Microsoft. And all the people who speak on the videos are like so enthusiastic. Yeah. We're going to make sustainability part of everyone's job. They love coming to work, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. This is even something I've seen with my research with my book is that people are so much more engaged when the organization has a truly authentic sustainability mission. People show up and people stay at the company for decades. And oftentimes what we see, kind of recently is that a lot of, especially the younger generations, are not staying at organizations for more than 2 or 3 years. They kind of hop between jobs. Part of that's because of, changing, job functions and job stability. But a huge part of it is that, if they see a competitor giving them a 10% pay raise, they're going to go take that. And I think that when you have that sustainable mission where suddenly the job is more than just a paycheck to you, but it's a source of meaning to you and to your family, then a competitor offering a slightly, higher pay for that employee doesn't matter as much. And you start to see people really engaging at work, staying at work, and that knowledge not leaving your organization because it's so hard to track how much is lost when you train an employee, you invest in that employee, and then they leave to a new organization. So sustainability can be really beneficial, I think, in a lot of aspects for a business, but I think that's one of the biggest ones. Is people really end up showing up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have another story.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, I'm fascinated currently by IKEA, partly because it's the most decentralized company. It's very hard. I still don't understand it, and I've been working on it
Mm,
for 2 years, how it all connects. And it's kind of owned by a foundation, so nobody can,
mm,
there can't be corporate raiders that come and buy it out. So,
mm.
and they're very mission oriented, as you know. And
Yeah.
they're in a hard business because, I mean, they have created a hard business for themselves in that they are completely dedicated to low price in their furnishing so that
Right.
ordinary people can buy them, right?
Hmm.
And they're completely dedicated to sustainability and wonderful workplaces, right?
Yeah.
And usually that's seen as a
Adversary relationship.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's right, exactly. And they're pulling it off, but it's not Patagonia, it's not a lot of little expensive these are the
Hmm.
low price stuff. And so and they're so decentralized that they have to be really good at engaging suppliers. and
Mm.
and that sort of comes to what I think is a really critical theme of sustainability, which is we have to make the boundaries of the firm more porous.
Yeah.
Obviously, we've got to get into the supplier chains with sustainability because that's where most of the action is actually. And and then another subject, maybe not for today, is we need to begin to have collaborations between firms, right?
Mm.
But I'll talk about that in a minute. Um, IKEA has a catalog that you can go online and find and see, and you can put it in the notes later. It's a worldwide catalog of innovations from their supply chains,
Wow.
right? It's called Good Examples and Inspiration from Across Global Transport and Logistics in the IKEA Supply Chain, Co-Creating a Decarbonized Goods Flow. And
Hmm.
and the catalog's maybe 6 years old now. It celebrates people who are innovating in the supply chain, often in partnership with a company, right?
Wow.
Both internal and external employees, and they give the person's name, or a whole group of little pictures of people and their names, and you can see a lot of successful innovations and partnerships. And it it really that kind of recognition, I think every company should do something like that,
Yeah.
and begin to celebrate the innovations. And what's so sweet about this is they're not just internal celebration, they're celebrating innovations all the way down the
Yeah.
value chain. Yeah. So,
Wow. That's really cool. I had no idea
yeah, and
that they were doing that.
you can read it.
Yeah. That kind of makes me think about you mentioned collaborations across different industries. Obviously,
Crossover.
that's a huge collaboration, showcasing all the successes of their suppliers. Businesses are normally not super fond of doing that because there's a lot of risk involved with that. Um, and in a very competitive market, it does seem to be disadvantageous to, collaborate with your competitor or cross industry in that way. But it's so important for innovation and particularly important for sustainability. Um, how have you seen companies evolve towards seeing that as risk and then seeing that as an opportunity? Have you helped any companies kind of get from one end of the spectrum to the other? Or have you seen any case studies of businesses kind of making that transition?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think we're in a watershed of that
Hmm.
transition. But
Okay.
but there the legal department is always concerned,
Yeah.
okay? Because, you have to explain to the legal department that it's not collusion.
Mm.
Collusion is about companies secretly trying to raise prices, right?
Hmm.
These kinds of cooperations are about lowering costs,
Mm.
because that's what the collaboration is this, like, you can't put in an electric truck charging stations as just one little company, right, or one huge
Yeah.
company either. It
Hmm.
we have infrastructure that either you pressure other people to do, or more likely maybe you put it in yourself. It's like we're depending on the private sector to do a lot of the work of making sustainability workable, which
Yeah.
which is requires that kind of collaboration. Uh, I have a friend, Kevin Hagan, who was at Iron Mountain at the time, but now he's got another job. And he was part of a very early on collaboration of purchasing power, purchasing alternative power 20-year contracts, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
if they could get enough of them together, they could put together these power alternative power agreements, and get it way way cheaper. And it was like uh, it is locked down prices for 20 years, okay? And normally when he would bring things to a CFO that he needed to do to make sustainability infrastructure work better, and he was, at that time, he was just putting the company sort of from 0 to 60 to becoming a real leader in sustainability from where he started. The CFO would just say, go away, go away, go away. And he showed him this, and the CFO said, bring me more of this. I need more of this, right? Because it's actually making things way cheaper for them. So there's there are now associations. He happens to be head of a power purchasing collaborative association, whose name escapes me, that that are actually formally doing this, and they work to minimize the risk. The risk, there it's not about risk because it's been formalized and contracted
Yeah.
and so forth. So I think we're in a watershed of that kind of
Hmm.
collaboration.
Interesting. That's really cool. And just for our audience, I believe Iron Mountain is one of the biggest sustainable data center companies. Is that correct?
Well, I think they're doing well now.
Yeah.
And Kevin was there for 7 or 8 years.
Yeah, they've done a lot of great work, I've heard, especially around sustainable storage and things like that, and particularly in data centers where it's so difficult to
Uh,
decarbonize them because they're so energy intensive. So that's really interesting. I
but
kind of wanted, oh yeah, go ahead.
excuse me, just
Sorry.
I just wanted to mention that when these companies get together, there is kind of the reality of there are these sustainability people who are trying to push the business units, right? The
Hmm.
ideal as is the mantra of your company to integrate the business with the sustainability. And that's, the companies we were talking about are trying to do that. But there's still a, a reality of an individual or 10 individuals or whatever, the sustainability department, who have reasons to be demoralized or feeling that their job is really hard and uphill, and they get so much learning and inspiration from talking to their peers. I mean,
Mm,
Climate Week was just,
yeah.
it was just all these people getting to talk to each other and get inspired by each other, right? You were there.
Yeah.
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 So the collaborations are important on that level too.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of makes me think about one of the things I wanted to do is kind of do a little brainstorming with you because something that's really difficult is particularly when a small business or small to medium sized business wants to be thinking about implement decarbonization strategies that they think might either reduce costs or be good for their investors or customers in some way, but ends up being really, really challenging. I'm thinking of, there's a lot of very small landlords that are trying to implement decarbonization strategies for their buildings, but a lot of the capital infrastructure that is really assists with decarbonization is very expensive, sometimes has a long timeline in terms of paying it back. And that's where I think that collaboration becomes even more applicable and important when you're thinking about some of these really small businesses or startups, ventures, even to medium-sized companies where they don't have, the same resources as IKEA would to invest in their entire supply chain and bring together these huge organizations to invest in really important sustainability functions, supply chain, capital infrastructure that would be assistive in this way. But when we're thinking about kind of the startup to the mid-sized business, how can they collaborate in a way that makes sense for them to be able to pool their resources and do this kind of thing? If someone who's listening to this podcast is running their own startup or their own mid-sized business, where do you think they should start, or how should they be, starting to think about this?
I don't know the answer, but I do know that there are um, numerous little associations, local associations of small business owners, and people meet every week. Or I used to run groups of people who were doing that, and they would meet monthly and that sort of thing. They're getting together is really helpful. You know, I think we want to keep the bills that came out in the last couple of years from the government, the
Mhm.
infrastructure and the BLLs. Uh, we want to keep that alive because
Mhm.
that has been so helpful. And
Yeah.
it's just more of that in red states than blue states. It's,
Hmm.
the I think that the governors are going to try and hang on to it because it's so important for people. Uh, and it's hard to get through to that money, but there are people who do coaching, and I mean government employees who do coaching and so forth about how to get grants and so forth, or their videos online, because people have been really uh, finding a lot of help in that
Mm.
in that money that
Yeah.
and it shouldn't, if you have a way of getting through to it, get it.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah, absolutely.
technically it should be around for a while, but it could be taken away. I don't know.
We'll see. Yeah, but there's a lot of wonderful grants, a lot of support from both the public and private sector
Yeah,
for small businesses who are wanting to decarbonize in a way that makes sense for them.
yeah. I,
Um,
I I looked at a grant for something I wanted to do that's due in December, and I realized I wasn't competent to write the grant. And so I do understand those limitations, but that's where if perhaps I should have gotten together with some other people and tried to figure out how to do it more collaboratively.
yeah, absolutely.
And there are a number of NGOs that are supporting that kind of work too. And so, at some point, maybe we should find ways to identify the list of all the ways of getting help,
Yeah.
you know, in the process of answering your question.
Hmm.
'Cause I don't know the answer, but I have a feeling there could be just a little manual that would help. Kind of like,
Yeah,
you know, how do you
absolutely.
how do you apply for a something? But this would be how do you get collaborative startup money,
Yeah.
or NGO startup money or whatever.
There are so many resources out there. And, even when you look at not just the resources in terms of funding or investment or things like that, but also in terms of the number of solutions. I know Project Drawdown is an incredible example of this, where they've listed out every climate solution that a business can implement or an organization can implement that can help the environment. And I think that's a really great database too for businesses, NGOs, government institutions to look at as well, for seeing the whole list of everything that can be used and implemented in your organization. It's just a great way to start thinking about implementing some of these strategies. Well, one of the things I wanted to kind of close with is talking about the triple bottom line. You talk about that in your books, of course, and I'm sure that's also part of a lot of the curriculum that you've implemented in your graduate school as well. That's really talking about profit, people, and planet. But how can more business people be implementing that as a mindset? How would you describe that as a philosophy in business? And how can more people kind of get started with starting to get that into the culture of their business?
Well, I'm gonna do a twist on
Okay.
the question. Okay. Um, John Elkington is the one who did the coined the
Hmm.
phrase, the triple bottom line. A great guy. And 25 years later, he wrote an article on the anniversary and saying he was going to do a recall on the triple bottom line. He
Hmm.
said, "You get to recall other things." And so he said, "I'm going to recall that idea." And because I think it needs tweaking,
Hmm.
it's not like a bad idea, but it's inadequate to the times we're in now, right? And he said it's because it's often used as a balancing thing. Uh, and well, we've got to have money, and we've got to balance it with the social and environmental goals. We'll clip a little here and do that, and then get it kind of like a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and the money, of course, is always prime because you can't be in business if you're not solvent. Uh, so you can't throw that one away. And he said, that's not what I meant, and that's not what we need to do, which is
Hmm.
that we need to have a systems view, and we need to say, we get all of these things, and that you will actually have better money if you have better sustainability, which is often cost saving in long or short term, whichever, particularly going into the various kinds of challenges we have in the future. Uh, and that if you don't bring people around, you can't do business on a messed up planet or a messed up society, right? So it has to be all of the above.
Hmm.
And that's of course very difficult. But I do want to say that um, it's kind of a new stream in sustainability thinking, at least in my head, and it goes back a long way too to the kind of the Gaia theory, which is we're working with the earth,
Mm.
and uh, we have these perhaps 30% of the mitigation of climate change can be found in regenerating natural systems.
Mm.
Okay, and you see that there's a company called the Olam Food Ingredients Company that I won't tell a whole story about, but they're just exemplary, the European, and and supporting these value chain so that the farmers are getting more and more ability to live healthier farms and so forth because of the regeneration techniques that the company has been working with them for years. These people did it before it was like popular to go into your supply chain if you're a food company and support
Wow.
farmers. They're really OLAM food ingredients, OFI. And um, and what the land degradation and ocean degradation is about a third of our problem.
Mm.
And that too something can be done about. Because and they I just want to give this example. Uh, are you did you ever hear of the Dust Bowl in
Yes.
the 30s, right? Yeah. And there were, let's see, 35 million acres destroyed, no topsoil, totally
Mhm.
unusable for farming, and another 100 million about to go, and 750,000 farms failed, and 2.5 million people had to leave. Okay.
Wow.
Okay, that's starting to happen in other places, right? But
Mhm.
that was a time where we had land degradation that was terminal, a terminal illness for the land. And do you know, over the next 10 years, with a new deal in the Civilian Conservation Corps, 3 million workers were mobilized. They had unemployment problems, and that was a solution. And so they had decent jobs and decent housing, and they planted 3 billion trees. And basically, they terraced things, 33,000 terraces, so that the water wasn't lost. And that's the
Mm.
biggest intervention. And millions of people found new economic opportunities. The land was restored in 10 years.
Wow.
And that's a note of hope.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. I think that we often forget that nature does have an incredible ability to heal itself. And if we can just invest a bit of our time and resources into it, we can see, wonderful comebacks. I've seen that, even in California areas where they've had toxic waste spills and things like that. They've closed and sectioned off that area for a number of years. And you come back and there's full grown trees and bear and, all of these wonderful animals, a full functioning ecosystem. And maybe it's not the same as it was before, but you see that comeback, even in places where there's been, a nuclear, disaster of some kind, there have been areas where the organisms find a way to live with that, nuclear energy surrounding them, where even the predators to the trees figure out a way to exist within that.
Right? And they put in enough mushrooms and it can sort of eat up some of that stuff.
Yes, mushrooms also are great at doing that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, since we're kind of nearing the end of our time, I wanted you to give us any last advice, given that you have this extensive amount of knowledge. You've, founded schools, you've written so many books on this topic, you've worked with companies. For anyone in our audience who's wanting to be more innovative in their organization, do you have any kind of final last advice for them?
Well, I think my position is that people are so much more able than we give them credit for.
Hmm.
People really, really want to be doing good things for the world, for their children, for their families, for their communities, for their ecosystem. You know, humans are full of potential, and we have underrated that in many of our companies, in many of
Hmm.
our schools, many places, and um, and it's time. When I think of the Microsoft community, uh, it's time to find a way to engage as many people around you as possible in
Hmm.
doing something that is fun and restorative and contributes to the customers and contributes to the bottom line, right?
Yeah.
It's the triple bottom line, but also has tremendous benefits that wouldn't be there if these people weren't spending a little extra time on the side figuring it out. And the companies that support these people are the ones that are going to thrive in the future.
Hmm. Absolutely. I love that. And where can people find you and support your incredible work online?
Entrepreneur.com. Uh, if you look at Connect, there's a place you put your email in and get a newsletter. And I'm Libba@pinchot.com.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sustainability Experts. If you liked the insights from our podcast, feel free to reach out to us on our website. We produce episodes with world-class executives every month and offer exclusive consulting and speaking services globally. Reach out to us and become a leader in your industry.